Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
About 6 years ago, my husband and I had an experience in the Appalachian Mountains that still freaks me out whenever I think about it for too long. We both lived through it, although I'm the one who had the most direct contact with whatever happened, which is why I'm usually the one telling the story. Neither of us are survival experts or anything like that. We've done plenty of hikes, a few climbs here and there, but we're not the kind of people who disappear into the wilderness for 2 weeks with nothing but a backpack. We always preferred renting cabins. It gives you a little more comfort, a little more protection, and honestly, it just makes the whole trip more enjoyable. For this particular trip, we had booked a cabin online that looked beautiful in the photos. It was tucked away in the mountains, surrounded by woods, and surprisingly affordable for how nice it seemed. A few weeks after making the reservation, and maybe 3 weeks before we were supposed to leave, I came across a post online. I think it was Reddit, although I'm not completely sure anymore. The person was talking about that exact cabin and claiming all kinds of strange things had happened there. Guests talked about hearing voices at night, seeing figures standing between the trees, feeling like they were being watched. Eventually, the discussion turned into people insisting the place was haunted. I've never really been the type to believe in that stuff. I'm not a particularly spiritual person. Ghosts aren't something I spend much time thinking about. If anything, I thought the whole thing was kind of funny. It was different, a little creepy in an entertaining way. I showed the post to my husband, we laughed about it, and we went ahead with the trip without giving it much more thought. When we finally got there, the cabin was exactly what we'd hoped for. It sat slightly elevated off the ground because of the uneven terrain. There was an open area underneath supporting the structure, then a staircase leading up to the main floor. Above that was a second level with the bedroom and bathroom. It was perfect for the 5 days we planned on staying there. So, on that first afternoon, we got everything organized, unpacked our stuff, and made sure we were set up so we could spend as much time as possible outside, exploring the area. Now, there's one thing about my husband that I've never particularly liked, and that's his habit of going for walks in the middle of the night. I'm not talking about stepping outside for a minute or standing on the porch. I mean actually heading into the woods by himself after dark. I've always hated it, partly because I worry about him, partly because I don't enjoy being left alone in an isolated cabin in the mountains. I'm not even talking about other people. There are predators out there. There are accidents. It doesn't take much for something to go wrong when nobody is around to help. I've told him this plenty of times over the years. Because of that, he always tried to stay relatively close to wherever we were staying and never disappeared for very long. It was during one of those nighttime walks that all of this happened. I was upstairs scrolling through my phone when I started hearing noises coming from somewhere near the tree line. I couldn't tell exactly what they were. Nothing very strange, just movement. Branches shifting, and leaves rustling. Since my husband had been gone for a while already, I immediately assumed it was him coming back. So I walked over to the window and looked outside. The woods were incredibly dark. There were patches where moonlight reached the ground, but most of the forest was swallowed by shadow. Near the edge of one of those darker areas, where I could barely make anything out, it looked like something was standing there. The first thing I felt was a chill. Just this sudden feeling that something wasn't right. At the same time, I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. The most logical explanation was that it was my husband. He'd been gone long enough that he was probably on his way back. But that feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger the longer I stood there looking. I shifted slightly away from the window so I could still see outside without making myself obvious to whoever was out there. I've never liked being alone in isolated places, not because of ghosts or haunted cabins. I've always been more worried about actual people. Then whatever was standing there started moving toward the cabin. At first I couldn't make out who it was, but as it got closer, I felt a wave of relief. It was my husband. At least, it looked like my husband. For a second I felt stupid for being nervous, but that feeling lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds before something else took its place. Because the closer he got, the more wrong he seemed. It wasn't his appearance. It wasn't his clothes. It wasn't even anything I could immediately point to. It was the way he was walking. I know that sounds strange, but it's the truth. When you spend enough time with someone, you learn the little things without even realizing it. You know the way they walk, the way they move around a room. Honestly, you can even tell it's them just from the sound of their footsteps. People you love have thousands of little habits that you stop consciously noticing. The way they move, the way they stand, the way they carry themselves. You don't realize how familiar those things are until something is slightly different. And this was very different. I stayed where I was, watching him get closer, becoming more convinced by the second that something must have happened while he was out there. Then I heard him call my name. That immediately set off alarm bells, because he never did that. We both had keys to the cabin. Whenever he came back, he simply unlocked the door and came inside. He knew I hated having to come downstairs alone at night, so he always avoided making me do that. Hearing him standing outside calling for me felt completely out of character. At first I thought maybe he was hurt. Maybe something had happened, and maybe he needed help. So I left the window and headed downstairs toward the front door. One thing about that cabin was that the door had a large glass section near the top. If you pulled the curtain aside, you could clearly see whoever was standing outside. As I reached the door, I heard my name again. I pulled back the curtain, and the second I looked at him, I knew that wasn't my husband. It had his face, it had his height, it had his clothes, but it wasn't him. Even now, years later, I struggle to explain exactly why. If someone asked me to identify one specific detail, I honestly don't know if I could. I just knew the eyes weren't his. There was something in the expression that made every alarm in my body go off at once. It felt like looking at something pretending to be someone you know. The panic that hit me was immediate. I didn't reason my way into it. I didn't stop and analyze the situation. I backed away from the door and ran for the handgun we kept locked away in the cabin. Looking back, I know how insane that sounds. I've always been a rational person. I don't jump to supernatural conclusions. But whatever instinct was screaming at me in that moment was stronger than anything I'd ever felt before. I grabbed the gun, ran back upstairs, opened one of the windows, and pointed it down toward the front of the cabin. It was still standing there, looking directly at me. For a moment, it didn't move. Then its expression changed. Not the way a person's expression changes. More like it stopped trying. Its mouth opened slightly, its lips pulled back. I could see its teeth, not smiling, not snarling, just showing them like a warning. Then it lowered itself in a single motion and took off toward the trees. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't move like a person. It didn't move like any animal I've ever seen either. Within seconds it was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the cabin, and I just stood there frozen, staring at the place where it had been. Because whatever I had just looked at through that window, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I can't really describe the kind of fear that hit me in that moment, because it wasn't just that I had seen something I couldn't explain. It was the realization that if that thing standing outside the cabin wasn't my husband, then where was he? Up until then, I had been focused on whatever was at the door, but the second it disappeared into the trees, my mind immediately went somewhere much worse. I started imagining him hurt somewhere out there in the dark, calling for help where I couldn't hear him, or worse. My thoughts were all over the place. Nothing felt rational anymore. For a long time, I just sat by the window, staring out into the clearing. I honestly don't know how long. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30. Time felt completely disconnected from reality. I kept scanning the tree line, trying to convince myself that what had happened could somehow be explained. But every time I tried to talk myself out of it, I would picture those eyes again and immediately feel sick. Then, right near the same section of woods where I had seen that thing disappear, I noticed movement. It wasn't much, just enough to catch my attention. The second I saw it, that feeling came back. The same cold dread, the same certainty that something was watching me. I kept staring at the trees, trying to figure out what I was looking at, when movement from a completely different direction caught my eye. Coming from the side of the cabin, only a short distance from the porch, I saw someone walking toward the house. The moment I saw him, I knew. The same way I had known the thing outside the door wasn't my husband, I knew this was. I can't explain how. I can't give you some logical reason. I just knew it was him. I threw the window open and yelled his name as loudly as I could. I told him to get inside immediately. I don't even remember exactly what I said. I was basically screaming at him to run. He looked up, saw how terrified I was, and immediately started moving faster. At almost the exact same moment, whatever had been moving among the trees burst out from the darkness. I saw it coming. My husband saw it too. 1 second, it had been hidden among the trees, and the next, it was crossing the clearing toward him. He sprinted the last few yards to the cabin. I remember hearing his boots hit the wooden steps. I remember fumbling for the lock. I remember him practically throwing himself through the doorway. And right as the door slammed shut, something hit it from the outside. The entire cabin shook. Not enough to break the door, but enough that I felt it through the floor. Then it happened again. Another impact. A few seconds later, I heard movement retreating back toward the woods. I ran downstairs and threw my arms around my husband. By that point, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. What scared me even more was seeing his face. He looked exactly the way I felt. His eyes were wide. His skin was pale. He looked like someone who had just escaped something he couldn't understand. The first thing he asked me was, "What was that?" I told him I didn't know. Then I told him what had happened while he was gone. I told him something had come to the cabin looking exactly like him. I told him it had stood outside the door, calling my name. Neither of us slept after that. We checked every door, every window, every lock. We closed every curtain and then checked them again. For the rest of the night, we sat near the front of the cabin, watching the clearing whenever we worked up the courage to look outside. Then as soon as there was enough daylight to see properly, we packed everything and just left. Even now, years later, neither of us has a good explanation for what happened that night. I know how ridiculous it sounds. Trust me, if somebody had told me this story before it happened to me, I probably would have rolled my eyes and assumed they had exaggerated half of it. But I know what I saw standing outside that cabin. Something tried to get inside that house that night. Something that wanted me to believe it was my husband. All I know is that 6 years later, I still think about that night more often than I would like. And there are moments when I wake up in the dark and remember the way that thing looked up at me through the glass. What I'm about to tell you happened around 7 years ago, give or take, and it's one of those things that never really leaves you. It comes back to me more often than I'd like, usually at night, and it unlocked a kind of fear in me that I didn't even know I was capable of feeling back then. Nothing like it has ever happened again. Not before, not after. Which almost makes it worse in a way, because I don't have anything to compare it to, no pattern, no explanation, just that one experience sitting there in the back of my mind. I've heard other people talk about similar things, and sometimes it all starts to sound repetitive, like the same story being told in different ways. But for me, it was just that one time, and it was enough to leave a mark that never really faded. This took place in the Appalachian Mountains, although I'm not even sure the location itself was the main factor. I've seen people describe things like this happening in their own homes, in places that should feel safe. So maybe it's not about where you are as much as it is about something else. Still, for me, it happened out there in the middle of the forest, completely exposed, and I do think that added another layer to it. I'm from Texas. I like to hike and climb every now and then, but nothing on that level, nothing like that terrain, and definitely nothing with that kind of reputation. So going alone was never even an option. I went with a friend of mine, Dorian. He's one of those people who's always up for anything. A bit more reckless than me, if I'm being honest. The kind of guy who says yes before thinking twice, so I already knew I wouldn't have to convince him too much. We planned the trip for the end of a Thursday. The idea was to drive through the night, get there sometime around midday on Friday if everything went smoothly, and then just get moving right away. We knew we'd be getting there a bit tired, but we didn't want to waste time. The plan was simple. First night, stay closer to the trail entrance. Second night, go deeper into the mountains. Then on Monday, start heading back, take it steady, and hopefully be home by Tuesday evening. We gave ourselves until Thursday before we had to be back at work, just in case anything didn't go according to plan, which, looking back, was probably the smartest part of the whole thing. The drive itself went well, long, mostly through the night, and I was the one driving. I've always liked driving at night. There's something about empty roads that just clears your head. And as we got closer to the Appalachians, the roads started getting quieter, more isolated, and even though by that point the sun had already come up, I was still enjoying it. It just felt different out there. When we finally reached the trailhead, there were 3 cars parked. One of them clearly belonged to a family that was just leaving. They were loading things up, kids running around, that kind of scene, and it looked like they had come in 2 vehicles. So once they left, it was just us and one other car. I had heard the trail was usually pretty popular, but I guess we went at a time of year when it wasn't as busy. We didn't waste much time and started hiking almost immediately. We were keeping a good pace, even though we didn't do this kind of thing all the time. We were both around 25 back then, in good shape, spent time at the gym, so physically we were fine, and we managed to cover a decent distance that first afternoon. Eventually, we found a spot that felt right to set up for the night. I wasn't entirely sure if camping was allowed there. There are always those restrictions depending on the area, but we stayed as discreet as possible. The spot was partially hidden behind a large rock formation that gave us some cover. Right in front of it, there was a small creek, and I remember thinking how perfect that was, because I've always liked falling asleep to the sound of water or forest noise. There was also a small clearing, just big enough for us to settle in comfortably, so overall it felt like we got lucky. That first night, everything felt right. We were in a good mood. The trip was going exactly how we had hoped. We did the usual things: set up a small fire, made sure it was controlled and safe, cleared the area around it properly so there was no risk of it spreading, and before going to sleep, we made absolutely sure it was fully out. No embers, nothing left burning. As for sleeping, we didn't actually have a tent. We used a tarp setup, one above us, one below, nothing fancy. It wasn't supposed to rain, so we weren't worried. Most of my camping experiences had been like that anyway. I've always preferred being more exposed, closer to the environment, even though I know most people feel safer inside a tent. I get it, psychologically it makes a difference, but in reality, if something really wants to get to you, a tent isn't going to stop it. It's just fabric. So for me it didn't matter, and Dorian was completely fine with it too. At some point during the night, I woke up. Not gradually, not the usual half-asleep kind of waking. It was sudden. And the first thing I felt was that something wasn't right. It's hard to explain without it sounding vague, but it was like the feeling came before any actual thought. Like my body had already picked up on something and I was just catching up to it. I didn't even consider myself particularly instinctive. I'm not the kind of person who immediately senses danger in every situation. But in that moment, I was fully alert the second I opened my eyes. My skin was covered in goosebumps, arms, legs, everything, like I had stepped into cold air, except I hadn't. I looked around and it was completely dark. The kind of darkness where the trees block almost everything, and even the moonlight barely gets through. You could hear the usual nighttime sounds, insects, distant movement, the creek flowing steadily nearby. Nothing that should have been alarming on its own. And still, there was this very clear feeling that we weren't alone anymore. Dorian was out cold next to me, completely at ease, lightly snoring in a way that made it obvious he hadn't picked up on anything. Meanwhile, I just lay there, wide awake, with that same feeling sitting in my chest, the kind that doesn't really give you a reason, it just exists. I had only felt something like that once before, years earlier, when I got jumped in a tunnel back in the city. It had been late, and I remember sensing them before I even saw them. That same awareness that something wasn't right, like your body registers a threat before your brain catches up. Lying there in the dark, it was like I had been pulled back into that moment, and I knew how bad that night could have ended. So I stayed alert, scanning everything I could see, listening as closely as I could, trying to pick up anything out of place. I must have spent 10 minutes like that, maybe more, just staring into the dark, waiting for something to confirm what I was feeling, but nothing ever did. Eventually, exhaustion won. I lay back down, still uneasy, and at some point, maybe an hour later, I drifted off. When we woke up the next morning, everything looked normal. No signs that anyone had been nearby. No tracks, no disturbed ground, nothing that suggested someone had been close to us during the night. The ground wasn't exactly soft enough to hold footprints anyway, so even if there had been something, I'm not sure we would have seen it. Still, there was nothing obvious. I mentioned it to Dorian while we were packing up. Told him I had woken up with a strange feeling, that something hadn't sat right with me. He didn't brush it off, which I appreciated. He asked a couple of questions, tried to understand what I had felt, and I could tell it made him a bit uneasy too, even though I downplayed it, told him it was probably nothing, maybe just some animal passing by or my mind overreacting. Even as I said it, I wasn't fully convinced, but there wasn't much else to go on, and we had a full day ahead of us. We packed everything up, had a quick light breakfast, and got moving again. That day ended up being great. We hiked for close to 10 hours, covered more ground than we had planned, and by the end of it, we were exhausted in a good way. The terrain had a steady incline for most of the day, enough to really make your legs work, and I could feel it, not pain exactly, just that deep activation you get after pushing yourself for hours. It felt productive. We were in a good mood again, like whatever had happened the night before had just been a passing thing. By the time we started looking for a place to camp, we had gone deeper into the forest, and the environment had changed a bit. The trees were denser, taller, the undergrowth thicker. There wasn't really a clear trail anymore where we decided to stop. We had stepped off it slightly to find a more secluded spot. It wasn't as ideal as the first night, but it worked. It felt more enclosed, more hidden, which at the time didn't bother me. We set everything up again, tarp above, tarp below, sleeping bags in place, everything arranged like the night before. This time we didn't make a fire. There was a bit of wind, and even though it wasn't strong, it was enough to make me uncomfortable with the idea. Dry leaves, warm air, it only takes one mistake. I've always hated seeing the damage people cause with forest fires, and I wasn't about to risk that. So we cooked using a small, portable stove, kept things simple, ate, talked a bit, and by around 11:30, we both agreed it was time to sleep. The day had taken it out of us, and we knew the next one would be just as demanding. That night, I didn't feel anything strange before falling asleep. If anything, it was the opposite. I felt relaxed, full, tired in the right way. I fell asleep quickly. And then, at some point in the middle of the night, something happened that had never happened to me before, and hasn't happened since. I woke up, but I couldn't move. It wasn't gradual. I opened my eyes, fully aware, and immediately realized I had no control over my body. I couldn't turn my head, couldn't move my arms or legs, couldn't speak. The only thing I could do was blink. And at the same time, I knew without any doubt, that we weren't alone. I could feel Dorian next to me, still lying there, still asleep. But there was someone else there. Close. Too close. I had heard about sleep paralysis before, of course. Everyone has, at some point. But I had never taken it seriously, always thought people exaggerated, that it was just a bad dream or something your mind made up. That first moment, realizing I was completely trapped in my own body, changed that instantly. There's a kind of panic that hits you when you lose control like that, when your body refuses to respond, and you don't understand why. And then there was the presence. I couldn't see it properly. It was behind me. I was lying on my side, and whatever was there was positioned just out of my field of view. But I could feel it. Close enough that if I had been able to move, I'm certain I would have been able to reach out and touch it. I could sense it shifting slightly, not in a rushed way, more like it was adjusting its position, aware of me, aware that I was awake. At one point, I was convinced it leaned in closer. There was this overwhelming sense that it was right there, almost studying me, and I had no way to turn around, no way to confirm what it was, no way to defend myself if it decided to do anything. That's what made it unbearable, not knowing, feeling exposed in a way I had never experienced before. Dorian didn't move, not once. He kept sleeping like nothing was happening, completely unaware, and that somehow made it worse because it meant whatever was happening was focused on me, specifically. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It felt like a long time, but it could have been minutes. At some point, the fear became too much. I don't even remember falling asleep again, or snapping out of it. The next thing I remember is waking up in the morning, and I felt awful. Not just tired, but completely drained, like I had spent the entire night running. My muscles were tense, sore in a way that didn't match the previous day's hike. I've pushed my body plenty of times before. I go to the gym regularly. I know what physical fatigue feels like, and this was different. It felt like my body had been locked in tension for hours. I told Dorian everything, every detail. Again, he didn't dismiss it. He looked concerned, asked if I wanted to head back, said we didn't have to keep going if something felt off. And this time, I didn't hesitate. I told him I wanted to leave, right then. We packed up quickly, no second guessing, just focused on getting out of there. And as I was taking down the tarp, I noticed something on the ground, near one of the trees. A cigarette, just lying there. I don't know if it had been there the night before. I don't know if we had missed it. It could have been old. There's no way for me to say for sure. But in that moment, seeing it there, it felt like confirmation of something I didn't want to accept, like we hadn't been alone. We left as fast as we could. Nothing was missing. Neither of us had been physically harmed. No direct interaction, nothing that could be clearly explained. And still, that night stayed with me. I didn't sleep the following night, not even for a minute. I was too on edge, too afraid of it happening again. But it never did. Not then. Not in the 7 years since. I don't know why it happened that night. I don't know if it was just sleep paralysis, or if something else was actually there with us. I know what I felt. I know how real it was. And I know it didn't feel like a dream. Whatever it was, that was the most terrifying night of my life. I've been a truck driver pretty much my entire adult life. It's one of those jobs you fall into, and then, before you realize it, it's been years, and it's just who you are. The only thing I ever did before this was working at a donut stand in a gas station, watching guys roll in at all hours, exhausted, quiet, just passing through. Back then I used to wonder what that kind of life felt like, and now I don't have to wonder anymore. I like it, I really do. I like driving. I like the solitude. I like seeing parts of the country most people never will. But it takes a lot out of you too, more than people realize. Long hours, bad sleep, always moving. And if you do it long enough, especially through the more isolated parts of the country, you start seeing things that don't always sit right. This happened in West Virginia, and to this day, it's the one stretch I try to avoid unless I absolutely have to go through it. I had a delivery I was already late on, which is how I ended up taking that route in the first place. Normally I stick to highways. It's just easier, safer, more predictable. But cutting through the mountains was going to save me a few hours, and I figured I'd done it before. I knew the road well enough. I'd just take it slow and get it done. I'd already been driving for a good 4, maybe 5 hours straight. It was around 2 in the morning, that dead kind of hour where everything feels a little off, and I was tired in a way coffee wasn't fixing anymore. I'd already had 2, maybe 3 by that point, and it wasn't doing anything. My eyes were getting heavy, that slow blink that lingers a little too long, and I knew I couldn't push it much further without risking something stupid. So I told myself I'd drive until I found somewhere I could safely pull over, just get half an hour, maybe an hour of sleep, enough to reset. Eventually I came across a small clearing just off the side of the road, nothing official, just a bit of space where the ground leveled out enough for me to park without worrying about the truck shifting. I pulled in, killed the engine, and just sat there for a second. It was one of those places where the dark doesn't feel normal. Not just the absence of light, but the kind that swallows depth. My headlights had been doing most of the work, and once they were off, it felt like the forest closed in a bit. Before lying down, I stepped out just to stretch my legs. That's when I thought I heard something coming from deeper in the trees. Nothing loud, nothing clear, just enough to make me turn my head and listen for a second. I couldn't see anything. The darkness was too thick for that, and after a few seconds of silence, I brushed it off. Out there, everything makes noise. Branches settle, animals move, wind shifts in ways that sound closer than they are. It didn't feel like enough to worry about, so I climbed back into the cab, locked everything like I always do, and laid down. I must have been asleep for maybe 45 minutes when I woke up to a hit on the side of the truck that was strong enough to shake the whole thing. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something brushing up against it. It was a full impact that snapped me awake instantly. For a split second, I thought maybe another driver had pulled up and knocked to say I couldn't park there. Or maybe I'd misjudged the space and something had shifted. But then I heard it. A tearing sound. Not metal, not something snapping, but something more like thick plastic being pulled apart. The kind of trailer I was hauling had reinforced panels, but part of the front section used a more flexible material, depending on the load. And that's exactly where the sound was coming from. I leaned over just enough to look toward the side, expecting to see an animal, a bear maybe, something with claws going at it. That would have made sense. But what I saw didn't match anything I could place. The shape was wrong. It was thin in a way that didn't look natural. Almost like it didn't have the weight it should have had. The body was close to human. I guess that's the easiest way to put it, but off in its proportions, and the head was too large. Not just big, but wrong in how it sat on the body. I didn't get a clean look, not enough to describe details properly, but I knew straight away I wasn't looking at something familiar. I didn't stay there trying to figure it out. I cleared whatever was in the way, moved straight into the driver's seat, and that's when the second hit came. Harder. Strong enough that I felt the truck shift slightly, like whatever was out there had put real force into it. That's when the panic actually set in, because trucks don't just move like that unless something serious is pushing them. I didn't think twice after that. I started the engine and pulled out as fast as I could manage on that kind of road, not caring about anything except putting distance between me and whatever was behind me. I drove for close to 3 hours straight without stopping. No radio, no brakes, just focused on the road and checking the mirrors more times than I can count, half expecting to see something following me, even though I knew how unlikely that was. By the time I reached a proper service station, I wasn't tired anymore, not even close. I stepped out and went straight to check the trailer, and that's when it really hit me that it hadn't been in my head. The front section was torn open, not cleanly, not like something had been cut, but shredded. There were marks across it that looked like deep scratches, uneven, aggressive, nothing like normal wear or damage. I've told this story a few times, mostly to other drivers, and the response is always the same. People say it was a bear, that I was tired, that the lighting messed with my head. And I get it, that's the logical answer. But I've seen bears before. I know what they look like. I know how they move. What I saw that night didn't match any of that. And more than that, I felt it. That moment when you realize you're looking at something that doesn't fit into anything you understand. I don't expect people to believe me, honestly. But ever since that night, if I'm anywhere near those roads, I don't stop unless there are other people around. And even then, I don't sleep as easily as I used to. I don't really know the best way to start this without it sounding like I'm setting something up. But the truth is, if you grow up anywhere near Point Pleasant, the story of the Mothman isn't just something you hear once and forget. It's everywhere. It's in the way people talk, in the little comments older folks make. It's in the museum downtown, the statue, the festival every year, all of it. And when you're a kid, it gets into your head early. I remember being maybe 8 or 9, hearing teachers mention November 15th, 1966, like it was a date everyone should already know. The night those two couples drove past the old TNT area and saw something standing near the abandoned buildings, something tall, dark, with those red eyes that didn't just reflect light, but seemed to hold on to it. Then you hear about December 15th, 1967, the collapse of the Silver Bridge, 46 people dead, and how sightings just stopped after that. No one ever says it directly when you're a kid, but you pick up on it. The idea that whatever people were seeing wasn't random, that it showed up before something bad happened. By the time I was a teenager, I'd read everything I could find, including John Keel and his theories about it not being an animal at all, but something else entirely, something that didn't really belong to the same set of rules as everything else. I didn't know if I believed that, but I couldn't shake the pattern either. It didn't feel like a campfire story to me, not growing up there. It felt like something unfinished. And I guess that's what stayed with me long enough to turn curiosity into something a little more obsessive. I moved away for a while in my early 20s, nothing too long, just work, trying to get some distance. But I ended up coming back more often than I expected. And every time I did, I'd find myself driving out toward the old TNT area without really planning to. It doesn't look like much if you don't know what you're looking at. Just stretches of woods, old concrete domes half sunken into the ground, roads that don't really lead anywhere anymore. But if you've grown up hearing what happened there, it feels different once you're inside it. Like the place never fully let go of whatever drew people there in the first place. A few months ago, I decided to stop circling around it and actually spend a night out there. Not in a reckless way, I told myself, just to see what it felt like when you stayed long enough for the quiet to settle in. Living in the Appalachian mountains, camping and long hikes were nothing new to me. I'd done them countless times. I packed light, brought a small tent, and set up a little off the main path, far enough that I wouldn't be visible from the road, but close enough that I could still orient myself if I needed to leave quickly. I remember thinking, while I was setting everything up, that it was strange how normal it all felt in daylight. Birds, wind, small animals. Nothing about it that suggested the kind of things people claim to have seen there. It was only after dark that the place started to shift in a way I can't really explain properly. I know that a big part of what I felt came from suggestion, from knowing what people claimed to have seen, from the anticipation, from that underlying fear that maybe there was some truth to the story. That doesn't necessarily mean anything had actually changed, but it felt real to me. And every hair on my body stood up. It wasn't sudden either. It happened gradually, as it kept getting darker and darker until it was full, absolute night. As it got darker, I also started to notice the silence settling in. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, more like everything else has stepped back. As strange as it sounds to say it out loud, that's exactly what I felt. I was sitting just outside the tent, not doing much, just letting my eyes adjust, when I noticed how far the darkness stretched between the trees. It wasn't just that it was hard to see, it was that the space itself felt deeper, like the distance between things had changed. At some point, I went inside the tent, zipped it up, and laid down, telling myself I was overthinking it. I wasn't scared, not really, just aware in a way I hadn't expected to be. I must have drifted off for a bit because I remember waking up without knowing exactly why. No loud noise, no obvious trigger. Just that immediate awareness that something wasn't the same as when I fell asleep. I stayed still, listening, trying to pick out anything different. But it was quiet in a way that made it hard to tell. And then I noticed the light. Not a beam, not something moving through the trees like a flashlight. Just a fixed point off to the side of the tent, faint at first, but steady. I thought maybe it was someone else out there, another camper, which didn't make sense given how far in I was, but it was the only explanation that came to mind. I shifted slightly, careful not to make too much noise, and looked through the thin fabric of the tent. That's when I realized the light wasn't coming from the ground. It was higher up, about the height where someone's head might be. but it wasn't shaped like anything I could immediately recognize. It wasn't bright either, more like a dull red glow, just enough to separate itself from the dark around it. I remember staring at it, trying to make sense of it, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation, something reflecting, something catching light from somewhere else. But there was no other light source. As I tried to rationalize it, a kind of absolute fear started settling in, this growing certainty that I was looking at two eyes. Even though I had never seen eyes like that before, I knew that's what they were. What made it worse wasn't the light itself. It was the way it stayed completely still for a while, and then, without any kind of warning, shifted slightly to the side. Not a step I could hear, not movement I could track, just a different position than it had been a second before. That's when I felt it properly, that drop in your stomach that doesn't wait for your brain to catch up. I didn't move. I didn't even reach for my phone. I don't know how long that went on. At some point, I realized there wasn't just one. Slightly further back, deeper between the trees, there was a second glow, fainter, almost like it was further away or partially obscured. That's when I stopped trying to rationalize it as something simple. Whatever I was looking at, it wasn't behaving like something I understood. They couldn't have been the eyes of an animal, and they couldn't have been the eyes of a person either. For the first time in my life, I felt like the legend was real, and that I was looking straight at it. But at the same time, that raised a question. There were two of them? Because as far as I knew, no one had ever reported seeing two together before. I didn't see wings. I didn't see a full shape. I didn't see anything I could confidently describe later and say, that's what it was. But I had the very clear sense that whatever was out there was oriented toward me. Not just present, not just passing through, but aware I was there. Eventually, and this is the part I keep going over in my head, the closer light lowered slightly, just enough that it disappeared behind something, maybe a tree, I don't know. And then it was gone, not fading, not moving away in a way I could follow, just not there anymore. The second one lingered a bit longer, then that too was gone. The forest didn't return to normal right away either. It took time for the usual sounds to come back, like something had been holding them back. As cliché as I know this might sound, it's exactly what happened. The sounds faded away completely, and then they started coming back again. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed in the tent until first light, packed up as soon as I could see properly, and left without really looking back. I didn't run, I didn't panic, but I didn't take my time either. The whole way out, I kept expecting to notice something I'd missed, some sign on the ground, some clear indication that there had been something there with me. But I didn't find anything. I've thought about it a lot since then, probably more than I should. I know how it sounds. Two lights in the dark, in a place that already has a story attached to it. It lines up too neatly if you want it to. But at the same time, I can't say for certain what I saw. I didn't see enough to make that claim. All I know is that the feeling people describe, that sense of something watching, something present before anything actually happens, that part I understand now in a way I didn't before. And the thing that bothers me isn't even what I might have seen. It's the pattern I grew up hearing about, the idea that it shows up before something else does. Because ever since that night, I catch myself paying a little more attention to the news, to things happening around here, wondering if that was all it was. Just a coincidence. Or if it was the kind of thing people have been noticing in these mountains for a long time, without ever really agreeing on what it means. The story I'm about to tell isn't very long, partly because I'm not great at putting things into words, and partly because what happened was strange and unsettling, but also, in a way, very simple. There's not a lot to analyze, no big crazy moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It's just something that happened, and I still don't really have an explanation for it. One thing you need to know before I start is that I fall asleep anywhere. I'm serious. When I was younger, if my parents had the money, they probably would have taken me to a doctor, because even now I sometimes wonder if something's off with me. I can fall asleep in quiet situations, sure, but also in places where I probably shouldn't, situations where most people would stay awake just out of instinct. So, when I tell you I spent 4 nights out in the Smoky Mountains and slept through every single night, even with something like this going on, I'm not exaggerating. It's just how I am. This happened about 3 years ago. I'd gone out to the Smokies on my own, just a few days to hike, clear my head, nothing unusual. I set up my tent a little off the main trail, not too far, but enough that I wouldn't have people walking past me all the time. It felt like a good spot. Flat ground, a bit of tree cover, nothing that stood out. The first night was completely normal, at least as far as I remember. I ate, sat around for a bit, then went to sleep like I always do, fast, no overthinking, no checking my surroundings every 5 minutes. I just knocked out. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was that my tent zipper was slightly open. Not wide open, just enough that it caught my attention. I remember thinking that maybe I hadn't closed it properly the night before, even though I usually double-check that kind of thing. It didn't feel like a big deal. Then I stepped outside. Right in front of the entrance to my tent, maybe a foot or two away, there was a small wooden cross stuck into the ground. It wasn't big, maybe the length of my forearm. 2 pieces of wood tied together, nothing fancy, but clearly made by someone. It wasn't something you'd just find lying around like that. I stood there for a while, just looking at it, trying to make sense of it. I pulled it out of the ground, set it off to the side, and went on with my day. I've had way more disturbing things happen in these mountains before, so I just brushed it off. Clearly, no one had actually hurt me. Maybe it was some kind of weird cult or something like that, but as long as I got out of there, everything would be fine. I hiked for hours, didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything unusual, so by the time I got back to my tent that evening, I'd already kind of forgotten about it. Second night, same thing. I went to sleep without any issues. And again, I woke up the next morning with the zipper slightly open. That alone made me pause a bit longer this time. I knew I had closed it. I was sure of it. But still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd moved in my sleep. Maybe the zipper had slipped a little. It didn't make sense, but it wasn't impossible. Then I stepped outside and there was another cross. Same size, same kind of wood, same placement, right in front of the entrance. At this point, I'm not gonna lie and say I was fine. I wasn't. It was pretty clear someone had followed me and done exactly the same thing as the night before. What bothered me the most wasn't even the cross. It was the idea that someone might have been standing there, watching me while I slept. I looked around immediately, like properly looked, scanning the trees, listening for anything. But there was nothing. No signs that anyone had been nearby. The ground wasn't soft enough to leave clear prints, so I couldn't even check that. I remember standing there thinking, okay, someone has to be messing with me. There's no other explanation. Someone had come up to my tent while I was sleeping, opened the zipper just enough to see me sleep, placed that cross, and left without waking me up. I didn't like that thought at all, but at the same time, I didn't leave. I don't know why. Maybe because nothing had actually happened to me. No one had tried to get in, nothing had been taken, I hadn't been hurt. It just felt weird, not dangerous, at least not in a clear way. So, I stayed. Third night, I went to sleep again, even with all that in the back of my mind. Same thing in the morning, zipper slightly open, another cross in the exact same spot. At that point, there was no more trying to explain it away. Someone had been there, not once, not twice, but 3 nights in a row. Close enough to touch my tent, close enough to open it, even just a little. And I had slept through all of it. I didn't stay for a 4th night. I packed everything as fast as I could, didn't bother with breakfast, didn't take one last hike, nothing. I just left. I never saw anyone. To this day, I don't know who it was or why they did it. I don't know if they were watching me or if it was just something they did and left. All I know is that for 3 nights straight, while I was asleep a few feet away, someone came right up to my tent, opened it just enough, and left that cross.